and then Mark on what it was.
Jim, we're going live, by the way.
All right.
Afterwards, I'll tell you what I had in my cruise boxes.
Yeah, after.
Are we on?
Yep. We're live.
Hey, Facebook. This is Jim Blythe, Veterans Impact Show. We're here for you today. Marc Liebman, Captain, U.S. Navy, helicopter pilot, great friend. We've got a great discussion and a very timely discussion about what's going on. Welcome to the Veterans Impact Show, where we continue the mission of highlighting veterans and service organizations who continue to serve our community and our nation. We're brought to you by Fairway Independent Mortgage and Lone Star Wealth Strategies. Don't worry, retire happy. Welcome aboard. Hey, what a great day. And for those of you joining us on AUN and on DBTV, the Amazon Fire and Roku, welcome aboard. It is an absolutely gorgeous day. And I got to tell you, fall is here in Texas. Football is here in Texas. And we're headed right around the corner for Thanksgiving. So I am so thrilled. This is my favorite time of year, but it also is the worst time of year for me for allergies. So if I have to cough over in the corner, I apologize. I want to tell you, I've got Marc Liebman here, Captain, U.S. Navy, retired, SAR helicopter rescue pilot. He was in some of the thick of Vietnam and doing some really, really crazy things. But you know what's so neat? We talk about all of that sometimes, but he is an author, a writer, a historian. His book series that he's done, well, I'll just tell you, it's so good, I can't put him down. And I called him up one day when he was, I read his book about what he did in Vietnam. And I said, hey, Marc, this is not fiction. And he goes, yeah, I had to change a few names and do things. It was so captivating. So I highly, highly, highly recommend you to go to Marc, M-A-R-C, Liebman, Liebman.com. Right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, remember, he's the 06, and I'm just the enlisted man that's here. But I got to tell you, Marc, you've got a new book coming out, and Diana's been helping you. She actually edited that, and I saw the book cover. Outstanding. That is really good. Yeah, there it is.
There it is.
Insidious Dragon. I love that. Marc, tell us about the plot. What's in this book? I can't wait to get my hands on it.
Okay, so this is the third book in my counterterrorism series. And in it, you have a People's Liberation Army senior colonel, which is the equivalent of essentially a brigadier general, who's been tasked or comes up with an idea to use bioweapons as a means to create chaos in a target country so that they will either be easier to conquer or more importantly, kowtow to the People's Republic's foreign policy goals. So the book takes place in essentially 2002, 2003. And the reason I picked that time frame is it's before COVID and it's after SARS.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a never land. So I didn't have to deal with the after effects of COVID if it was later. So anyway, so as part of the book, I'll just give you a tease on it. He stumbles upon a young Chinese girl who has relatives in the United States. She came to the United States, got a PhD in virology. She comes back, or she's recalled back to the People's Republic, and her thesis for a doctor's degree was on virology and contagious viruses. So he recruits her, the senior Army colonel, to work on this project, and she becomes horrified when she finally figures out what he's really doing is creating a bioweapon. And unbeknownst to the PRC, that the Chinese girl's cousin is a naval intelligence officer, U.S. Navy intelligence officer. So it has in it a lot of stuff about the give and take and how this stuff works, sort of. I don't spend a lot of time talking about what goes on in a virology lab, because your head, your eyes, and my eyes, and Diane's eyes, when she proofread it, would have rolled back into her head. But there's enough in there so you know what's going on. Then the other thing that is that there are 4 or 5 helicopter sequences in there, one of which is probably the best one I've ever written.
I can't wait.
It goes about 10, 12 pages. And it will have you on the edge of your pants, or edge of your seat, excuse me. But anyway, the book should be out by the end of this month.
Okay, and it's going to be on Amazon, and it's going to be
on
in-
Amazon, and it's going to be on Barnes and Noble, and probably 8 or 9 different other outlets. I've moved. I'm starting to move a lot of my books onto it's called books to read or digital to digital, and they have about 8 or 9 independent distributors, maybe more.
Mhm.
And so I've already moved Flight of the Pawnee and Failure to Fire onto that platform, as well as Amazon and Barnes and Noble and other places. So you'll be able to get an ebook as well as paper copy. And
Now you are an Amazon bestseller.
yes, 5 of my books, Flight of the Pawnee, let me see if I get this right, The Simmershire Island Incident, Forgotten, Raid of the Scottish Coast, and Big Mother 40 have all been Amazon #1 bestsellers.
One of the things I want to depart just a second, though, because in reading the books, you have a way of developing the characters. And most men, when they develop characters, they do it from a male perspective. But what I've seen you do in your books is give a really good perspective from both men and women. And you did that in your sales series. And so if you're a lady and you go, heck, I don't want to read another war book, that's for the guys, I'll get it for my husband. Well, you might enjoy it too, because the way you develop the characters are amazing.
Every one of my books has a strong female character.
Mhm.
In some cases, like Inner Look, a woman is the antagonist, so to speak, the bad person. In Forgotten, I probably created the most interesting female character I've ever created. The name is Janet Pulaski, and I'll tease a book that's coming up. And I'm going to bring her back in a book called Red Star of Death. It's sometime late this year. It'll be out probably in December. I'm saying December right now. But yeah, in every one of the books, there is a strong female character, either supporting the hero, or in the case of Forgotten, she is more or less the principal character, or the antagonist, like in Inner Look. In Moscow Airlift, I used deployments because the hero Josh Heyman's in Moscow, and his wife is back home in San Diego dealing with teenage children. And if you're ever been deployed and you have teenage children, they're a challenge. Even though they come out to be fine human beings, they can be challenging. And I'm sitting here as I speak, I'm sitting here watching my son deal with his 3 teenagers.
Yeah, what is that old prayer? Oh Lord, let my children have children that were just like them, and so I think as we get into this program, we're going to talk about the military family going on deployment. You've been on several deployments.
Yep.
I did 3, one with a helicopter rescue unit, and I tried to keep those helicopters in the air that you were flying, not with my squadron. But it is a tremendous experience being on a combat carrier, whether you're with an A4 outfit like I was, and then went back with HC1 and rescue. It is an amazing experience, and you brought that to life in Cherubs 3 and Big Mother 40 in such a way. And I think people can't even imagine what it's like to deploy, to be aboard, to live, and to operate, especially when you go into 24-hour-a-day flight ops.
Yeah, so it's interesting. It's actually when you're on the ship, it's easier because the ship is your world. And so most carriers will operate 12 flying hours a day. And that means the flight deck crew is up on the flight deck, moving airplanes, repairing catapults, or doing maintenance on the catapults and arresting gear. They're probably up there 16 to 17 hours a day. So the typical U.S. carrier can run 24 hours a day, and there are ways to do it. But what you do in terms of flight operations, it becomes limited the longer you operate 24 hours a day. So the ideal thing is to always have 2, and we'll talk more about this as to why Eisenhower was sent to the Med and that thing. But if you have 2, then you both fly 12-hour flying days. You split it however you want. Sometimes it's one is on from 6 in the evening to 6 in the morning. Some are on from noon to noon. It depends on what the senior officer wants to do. But what's interesting from a helo perspective is that the helo dead, even if the ship is not flying, it's flying.
Yes.
And so we typically operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I've always, most of the carriers I've been on when we've deployed, we've always had the night shift, which meant 6 in the evening till 6 in the morning. So if you look at my logbooks from each of my deployments in the Navy, we have black ink or blue ink for daytime flying. You have red ink for nighttime flying. Then you have green ink if it's considered a combat mission. So I have pages and pages and pages of nothing but red ink in my life.
Well, and a lot of people don't know that helicopter, and you typically have two fighters that are sitting on the catapults, and the helicopter is over to the side, and both pilots are in the two fighters, and your entire crew is in the helicopter.
Yep, we're either sitting in it or right next to it. So when they back in the days when we had to deal with the big bad Soviets, and now when they deploy into Southeast Asia, South China Sea, off Taiwan, south of Japan, where you have to deal with the Chinese. So there's typically two jets sitting on the waist catapults on what 2-minute or 5-minute alert, depending what is set. And in front of them is the if the SAR helo is not airborne, it's there. So the exciting part is if the jets have to be off in 2 minutes, we have to be off in less than
one.
Less than. So you're sitting there. Typically, one guy's in the cockpit. You got all the switches, so all you have to do is push start on the two engines or one engine. Well, now they're all twin engine, but they push start and engage the rotors, and then pull the tie downs off and chocks off, and away you go. You can do it in 30 seconds to a minute. But it's strange enough. It's all assholes and elbows for a few minutes. And if you're going to take going to the bathroom is a big deal because every time I've gone to the bathroom or my co-pilot has gone to the bathroom, we've gotten to launch.
Yeah.
He's come. I don't want to tell some of the funny stories about that, but anyway, the neat thing about it, in the H2 when this happened, you can fly with one pilot, and I have done that.
Yeah,
because you just leave the guy behind. You can do it with one air crewman, but you don't want to. So one time we had to launch on a 2-minute alert, and the air crewman was doing his business. So one of the line people who was an air crewman just jumps on board, and away he goes. He's wearing his dungarees and flight deck vest, so he doesn't have a flight suit on. It doesn't have any of his gear, so he's got to use the other guy's gear. It can be a zoo. But anyway,
but you adapt. You do what you got to do, and people don't understand. The other thing that a lot of people didn't understand is when we were crossing the Pacific, or when we were going even to Singapore or anywhere in the world, at that time, the Russians sent that bomber, the Bear, out, and we were frequently overflown. And every time one of those things would show up on our radar, we would go to launch and launch the F-8s. What they were trying to do is get us to launch our F-8s, which was our interceptor fighter, because they knew that guy was going to have a hard time getting aboard. And if they could shoot it down by just letting it crash and landing on the helicopter, they'd accomplish something. I really believe that they were trying to not provoke us into a firing situation, but to create such a dangerous situation. If something could go wrong, it would go wrong.
Yeah, the whole thing about the Bears is that we used to, and sometimes there were Badgers, sometimes there were backfires. These are all Russian bombers for those you don't know. Is they were always trying to keep track of the carrier battle group. So we always had a what they call an AGI, an intelligence gathering ship with following the carrier, typically within visual distance of the carrier. But we used to lose the AGI because it was slow. It could go 12 knots. So you kick the carrier up to 15, 20 knots, go for 20, 30 minutes or an hour or so off in some direction. Typically you'll change direction and you get rid of the AGI. But we used to do all kinds of crazy things to try to play with the Russians' minds and hide the carrier. I've been on exercises where we literally took 4 carrier battle groups. It was in 1987. We approached Petropavlovsk, and the first thing the Soviets knew is when the E-2 was 100 miles in front of the boat, and it lit off its radar. And we literally watched, and I'm saying watched, I'm talking about electronically watched the Russians or the Soviets go nuts. They started launching airplanes, trying to find the carriers. They started flying. Bears came out of Anadyr and Magadan and God knows where else. the backfires are launched out of whatever base they were at in those days. And they came out to see what we're doing. All we did is we had the E2 and 2 F-14 sitting out in front of it. And so another time we, same place, we went up and we stuck a cruiser, an aircraft cruiser, and we got it to within 50 miles of Petro unknowns. And they lit off their fire control, their air search radars. And suddenly again, the Soviets went, oh my God. And so we would do these kinds of games all the time. And then they always like to fly over the ship. So whenever you see pictures of a carrier and a Russian Bear, it's always you'll see an F4, F-14, or an F-8 in the picture, the carrier in the background, and the Bear. So the photographer is the wingman. And typically there's another fighter sitting after the Bear, or the backfire, or whatever it is, with a firing solution. And that was the game. And he typically would come down to about 5,000 feet and fly over the carrier, and we wave at them. They wave at us, and
sometimes they got closer than that.
Yes, they did. It was like I said, always entertaining. And then the fighter guys took a bunch of pictures, and they got run around the ready rooms, and I've got a couple of them because then there's the helicopter down the. You got there's an F4, the Bear, the other F4, and us because he was really low, and then America. So and more than once the Bear or the Russians inland airplane or surveillance airplane has crashed. There was one relatively unknown instance where he was doing a turn at low level and got a little lower than he thought, dragged the wingtip in the water.
Ooh.
Yeah, it was ugly.
Mark, let me ask you a question. I'm interrupting you, but let me ask you a question. We played those games with the Russians. Are we still playing games with the Russians, or is it now the Chinese we're playing games?
Both.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The Russians don't really bug us unless we're up in the North Sea. I understand the Russians feared the U.S. carriers more than anything else because we could go places where they didn't want us to go, i.e. the Barents. Barents Sea, if you don't know, is up north of Norway. And we, with the Brits, would go up there and would do exercise every couple of years with carriers, hide the carriers in the fjords where they couldn't see them on radar. You put a submarine outside them, they can't get in with one of their subs. So we used to do that all the time. The Chinese are much more unpredictable and are getting much more aggressive.
That's something we're going to talk about a little more when we come back after these words from all of our partners. I'm Jim Blythe, and this is Captain Marc Liebman, U.S. Navy retired SAR helicopter rescue pilot. I wish I'd gone out with him because we'd even be closer friends. This is a great day. Thank you for joining us on DBTV, on the AUN network. Join us on YouTube, subscribe, Facebook. Spread this out. Now, when we come back, we're going to be talking about deployment, the deployed family, the sailors, and we're going to be talking about what goes on to get a ship going, because guess what? We just launched one to head to the Middle East. So this is Jim Blythe, and this is a Veterans Impact Show. We're here for you. Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show. And thanks to our sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage and Lone Star Wealth Strategies. Now, let's continue this great conversation. Hey, we're having a great day. By the way, I work for Fairway Independent Mortgage. We're the largest non-bank mortgage company in the nation. I specialize in reverse mortgage, senior care. I'm a certified senior advisor. I take a great deal of pride in helping seniors and veterans, and this is just a wonderful opportunity that we're able to talk with a great helicopter rescue pilot who was Vietnam era, same as me. All right, we're going to be talking now. Eisenhower.
Yes.
She's on her way.
Not as in the general, but as in the aircraft carrier.
Yeah. And a lot of people, when you say Eisenhower, they don't even know. That's frightening. Eisenhower Strike Group. What's in a strike group, Mike?
Okay, today the strike group is the aircraft carrier. There's typically one or two cruisers of Aegis class or Ticonderoga class, and then 3 or 4 Burke class destroyers. The Burke class destroyers have pretty much the same systems as the Aegis, but not as much and aren't as big. and slowly the Ticonderoga class, because they're aging out, are being replaced by more and more Burkes. And then there's a supply ship. Most generally is primarily an oiler, and then there's a submarine, attack submarine assigned to work with the battle group or the strike group, as it's now known. I don't want to get into what the subs do. It's beyond my level of knowledge. So
They're out there.
They're out there. Well, actually, I do. Well, I actually do know what they do. But anyway, so it's typically now, instead of about 10 to 12 ships in the battle group during my day, you have 6 or 7. And they're all home ported in a town, in this case, Norfolk. And so what happened to Eisenhower is the president of the United States decided to deploy a second aircraft carrier. So Ford and its strike group were already in the Western Med, but you can transit, just go east and you'll get to the Western Med pretty quickly, or Eastern Med pretty quickly. So what a lot of people don't know is, on a daily basis, typically, supposedly twice a day, the president of the United States is briefed on the location and readiness status of the aircraft carrier, the battle group, and its air wing. It's it and the SSBNs, the ballistic missile carrying U.S. submarines, are the only other ones that are briefed that often every day. So President Biden decides wants to send a second carrier. Now, there's a lot of logic behind doing that. Number one, it enables you to operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, because now one carrier can fly 12 hours, the other carrier can fly the other 12 hours. If you try to do it with one carrier, you're going to limit the amount of sorties you can generate, because the flight deck crew is the limiting factor, not the airplanes or the air crew. The guys will run the flight deck. You running them 12 hours of flight operations plus 2 hours of getting ready plus 2 hours after you shut down is about the max. And these are young men and women, 18 to 25, 26 years old. And yes, they're young, but they run out of gas. And when they start getting fatigued is when you start having accidents.
Yep, been there, done that. At one time, we were the only carrier on the line. And we were running 24-hour-a-day flight ops. It just about killed all of us, and everybody gets crazy. The other side of that is we only operated on the line typically about 30, 35 days max.
Yeah.
We were on the line 45 days one time, and we ended up doing those 24-hour flight ops. We were the only carrier on the line. It was a nightmare.
Oh, yeah. I mean, normally they like to, the Navy likes to, during Vietnam, pretty much any place else, put the carriers on station for where they're supposed to be out 35 days, 30 a month, and then come back. And this is a wartime thing for about a week to let everybody recharge their batteries, and then do some maintenance on the aircraft and the ship, and then go back out. During Desert Storm, we were pushing 40 days. I've been on a carrier that was on station for 90 days. That's really ugly. But we can do it. So let's come back to what we were going to talk about, which is what happened. So the president says, as Eisenhower go. So normal transit speed for a carrier strike group is somewhere between 12 and 15 knots. Okay. The reason being is fuel consumption. The carrier can go 30 plus knots forever. I would say forever, but for years. But they don't do that. So if they're going to make best possible speed, they may kick it up to 20, 25 knots. But that means that you're refueling your oil burning ships every other day. And so you typically have to slow a little bit, get below 20 knots. We can do it faster, but typically they like to do it at 12 to 15 knots. To get from Norfolk to the Straits of Gibraltar is about 5 days. And that's another 3 days onto off the coast of Israel and Gaza in that area. Like I said, if you go by 30 knots, you can make landfall Straits of Gibraltar in 3 days.
But you left everybody behind.
Well, we've done
close
that.
to it.
We've done that, particularly if you're not worried about risk during the transit. So just to give you an idea, when Ranger transited to participate in Desert Shield, Desert Storm, we left the Philippines, and we still had to maintain our carrier quals because you got to do this every so often. So we steamed at 25 knots with 2 of our cruisers, left all the slower ships behind and the oiler, because Ranger was an oil burning, and we made it from Subic Bay to the Straits of Hormuz in 12 days. That we averaged 20 plus knots. So when the guys took off, because we flew every day, the ship was, we didn't care what the wind was, which made it also entertaining for recoveries more than takeoffs. But the guys knew if they had to punch out, we'd send the helo crew back for them. But the ship was going.
The ship was going,
Yeah.
and you depends on your weather. You could have a pretty rough sea state out there.
Correct.
Too.
So sea state drives all about. This is approaching winter. It's the Atlantic. Atlantic gets pretty nasty starting next month. But anyway, so my guess is if they go faster than 15 knots, the carrier is going to refuel the small boys that are with them, and we do that easily.
Mark, when we come back, I want to talk about the family and what's going on for the sailors and Marines and people involved in that deployment, because a lot of people don't know. Oh, jump on the ship and go.
Yeah,
there's a whole lot more to it than that. And I've done it. You've done it. So when we come back, we're going to be talking about the effects on the family, the effects on the soldiers and sailors that are on board those ships in that strike group, and the importance, though, of supporting that strike group and supporting those sailors, because we're coming in to a rough time of year as far as being deployed. So let's talk about that when we come back. And again, we're brought to you by Fairway Independent Mortgage, and I'm so glad to be there. Just look me up. I can help you out. This is Jim Blythe, and this is the Veterans Impact Show with Marc Liebman. Today is your day. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show. And thanks to our sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage and Lone Star Wealth Strategies. Now, let's continue this great conversation. Mark, we've been talking about the Eisenhower just deployed, and it was an emergency deployment or rapid deployment.
Surge is the correct term.
Surge. Okay, thank you very much. Remember, I only spent 4 years, not a whole lot more.
That's okay.
So what does it take to deploy an emergency? What do they got to do, and how fast do they have to do it?
Okay, so normally when you get a surge call, the carrier is either in port, hopefully, or and it's in some stage of its workup for its next deployment where it's feasible. And by feasible, I mean in the training pipeline, because between deployments, typically the air wing and the ship's company about a third changes. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to work up the air wing, go through the training syllabus. The ship has its own training syllabus for all its rates and all its systems. So Eisenhower probably was close to probably in the last third of that. Okay. So the first thing that happens is all leave is canceled. Second of all, as everybody knows, it is now 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to get the ship ready. So you got to load supplies, you got to load supplies, parts, food, all that kind of good stuff. You essentially, if you're smart, you move onto the ship. Even though you're living in, let's say you're in the air wing, well, the air wing's not probably not coming up, but if you're in the air wing, you're going to move all your stuff on board because you're going to leave in 2 or 3 days. You might as well do it in 2 or 3 trips as opposed to all at once. So like I said, leaves are canceled. Kids are decision is made to bring sailors out of schools or leave them in schools, depending on the importance of the school and where they are in the school. So all this is going on. Then they're going through a maintenance review of what has to be done to get ready to go to sea. And so then they reprioritize those things because some of it's going to be done at sea, some of it's going to be deferred.
Yeah.
Okay? And so on the family side, so if you were, let's say you were the spouse of a female sailor, you would now suddenly realize that dad, okay, is not going to be here for important events that you had planned to for the next, let's say Eisenhower is not leaving for another 3 months. So in those 3 months, I guarantee you there'll be family events. A lot of guys,
Christmas, Thanksgiving.
Well, yeah, Christmas, kind of birthdays, anniversaries. There's always somebody's got in any squadron or department always has a parent that's ill and probably not going to make it. Then there's the other thing that's really exciting is the fact that a lot of people, my wife and I weren't this smart or good at it, but planning births. So you plan the birth of your child 3 or 4 months, in your stand down period. So hopefully you try to do that. So, but now suddenly you're not going to be home.
Yeah.
And suddenly mom is going to be a new mom with a newborn and a family, assuming you have more than one children. And that is a lot of stress because just a baby is stress. But if you're a mother and you, let's say a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old, And that's a 4-year-old and a 6 or 7-year-old. So it's like 3 years between the kids. That's a huge problem for the mother, because suddenly she's mom and dad and she's dealing with a newborn, which means she's not sleeping well. The kids are adjusting to having the new arrival, even though they say, "Oh wow, we're gonna have a baby brother or sister." Well, it's not that easy. And then there's a stress of, what are you, the husband or spouse that's being deployed, going to do? Okay, are you going into combat? So for the air wing, that's a very, very real question. What are we? I'll get into what they're going to do or could do in a second. So that adds a certain amount of stress. So when you kiss mom or dad goodbye, when the ship pulls out of port, there is a certain amount of feeling you may never see them again. Okay. And or the next time you see them, they may be in a hospital, severely maimed, burned, or whatever. And that's just part of being in the Navy, or being any deployable unit in the U.S. military. But the Navy does deployments all the time. I mean, we much more so than the Air Force and the Army.
Well, they have bases. Okay.
Yeah.
And our base is a carrier, is a flat top.
Our base floats.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, and so like my wife has done the camp follower thing, where she's followed us around the Med. She's been to Asia. Yeah, it's that's cool. But it doesn't substitute for being able to go fly your airplane, come back. Let's say you're at Aviano and you're in the Air Force, Aviano Air Base in Italy. So you're an Air Force pilot, you're flying out of Aviano, and your wife and his family is living either on base or in outside in Aviano. You go home and you go fly, and then you come home and you have dinner with your wife, or you fly at night and you come home and you have different breakfast with your wife and kids. Doesn't work that way on USS Boat. So the stress of deployment is a stress factor unto itself. A surge just ratchets it up. So, but this is one of the beauties of a carrier, because as the Air Force learns pretty much every time, the Earth is covered 75 to 80% by water, and a carrier can generally get to someplace and park itself in international waters where we have no bases.
Yeah.
None whatsoever. And we can be the base. And so, as I said earlier, depending on the number of carriers, you can do a bunch of different things. But in this case, more than likely, and this is as of yesterday, before Hezbollah attacked northern Israel, it was probably going to do surveillance, help the Israelis with intelligence, act as a deterrent to hopefully keep Hezbollah and some other actors in this area from doing something dumb. And then the other thing is, we can do humanitarian support. We have a hospital on board, a fairly decent sized hospital, not as big as what's on the amphibs, and I'll get to the ARGs in a second. The amphibious ready groups is an ARG. But we can land special forces on the carrier, and then they can go off and do what they do,
whatever they need to do
for hostage. I don't see the U.S. being involved in the hostage rescue. We have very little intelligence of what goes on in Gaza. We'll leave that up to the Israelis. But the fact of the matter is, we can support it with all kinds of things that the Israelis may not have or may not want to use, and ask us to provide it. So, and then there's the pure humanitarian thing. So as a helicopter pilot, one of the most gratifying things I've ever been involved with is disaster relief. When you land with a helicopter with a medical team full of food in some remote village that's been devastated by a typhoon or a hurricane, just the expression of people's faces when you show up is phenomenal. It just makes your day, literally. I mean, in a positive way. And we're really good at that. And then the last thing they can do is what we call NEOs, non-combatant evacuation operations. So pull people out. So let's just say Hamas decides to let some of its people out. We can do that. We can, more than likely, what we would do is move the people using the helicopters, and we may bring in some Marine MV-22s, move the people from wherever they're being pulled out from to an airstrip, then they can be flown someplace else. Or we bring them to the carrier, and then we just take them someplace else. Or we bring them to the amphibious ready group, which has a huge hospital, has much more medical support, and it has a well deck. Unfortunately, when they're deployed, the well deck is full, but there's places on a gator, if it doesn't have its full Marine complement on board, that you can house refugees. I've been on carriers where we've had refugee. We basically push everything aft in the hangar deck, put whatever we can on the deck, and we turn the hangar deck into a hotel for refugees. I mean, we do this all the time.
I was talking to some SAR pilots when I was in Norfolk, and they told me about what they did when Katrina happened.
Yep.
I don't know if they actually pulled a carrier around to the Gulf of Mexico, but those guys were coming from Norfolk in helicopters. I don't know where they were being refueled.
Yeah, they flew from Norfolk and Mayport. And then we brought, I think it was one of the amphib ships offshore to act as a base. So they had a place to do maintenance, because there aren't a lot of parts stuff for H-60s and H-46s. So they parked a gator or two off the beach. Yeah, it's what we do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Been there, done that. Let me ask you another question, because this is something near and dear to my heart. Do they, and I think they did when I went overseas, they said, if you got a family, do you have a will? Do you have documentation?
Yeah.
Do you have all of this in place? Because if something goes south, you need to be able to have this to take care of the family.
Yeah, so I've been a CO and a department head and a division officer, and as soon as the surge comes out at the first muster, you have your leading petty officer there's a checklist that you actually have. It's in a Navy instruction, and you sit down with every sailor in your division or department, and you go through it, because the last thing you want to have is one of those documents missing. So there's things like medical powers of attorney, wills, a general power of attorney, so that she can act in your name. And the Navy has standard forms that have been, I'll use the word, battle tested in courts. And the JAG officer literally sits down, and that's one of his primary roles in getting before you go out to sea. And then you get them all notarized, and you get them to your wives and kids. And I have actually had the JAG officer bring in all the wives, I should say spouses, and bringing them all in for a workshop. Okay, this is a power of attorney. This is what you can use it for. This is why it's important. And this is the will. These are the act things. These are all, has your husband given you all the credit card information? Do you have his passport numbers? Do you have copies of all this? I mean, it just goes on. The list goes on and on and on. But that's one of the things you have to do in pre-deployment stuff.
Yeah, you need to sit back just a little bit.
I find that fascinating, because so many times in what I do, I talk to people and I go, do you have these documents? Well, no. Why would I have that? Well, let me tell you, just because you're deploying overseas to a potential combat situation, just getting on LBJ freeway every day is a combat situation, in my opinion. So you need to have these things. They're terribly important. And let me tell you, I can tell you horror stories that I go through all the time, because families did not prepare. So the Navy tries to make sure, or the Navy makes sure everybody is prepared. The other thing is, you were a CO of a unit. I know the CO of our unit, his wife, who was going to be staying home, organized the spouses in that unit.
Yeah, that's another thing, is if you're the CO of a unit or a department on a carrier, because a carrier has a crew of 4,000 people. The air wing's another 1,500 people or more. So as a CO of a unit, your wife is Mrs. CO, and she's responsible for getting the wives together. So most Navy squadrons have a squadron wives club or wives group. So the wives get together. But again, it's her job is to I said her, but talk to the wives, because what the first warning sign they'll teach you is like, when my wife did it, it was like they had a weekly luncheon, or then it was pretty much every week. And when a couple wives starts not showing up, that's a huge alarm bell. Okay. The second thing, there's a recall list. So let's say my wife's a CO's wife. Okay. And your wife is there, and suddenly you have a death in the family. Okay. Or worse, going to be a family member has a heart attack. Let's say not a death. So now you have an emergency leave situation. The CO's wife then goes to, the wife of the spouse that's ill goes to the CO's wife. CO's wife contacts us. The Red Cross is a whole process here. But your wife, as a CO's wife, needs to know that process. Okay. So I had our JAG officer and a bunch of other so she had a checklist, and then she has her own recall bill. Okay. And so part of her job is to keep checking on the wives, because it's literally, as she will tell you, it's the crisis of the week. Johnny has fallen down and broken his leg. Janie has fallen off her bike and scarred up her arm. Mrs. So-and-so's father had a heart attack, or grandma just was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And so now the next chain is how to get in touch with the guy on the boat, and then how to get him home if that warranted, or if nothing else, get him to a phone. And this, I'm dating myself, but today we have email and Skype and all that kind of stuff. We didn't have that in those days, and back when I was in the Navy. So, communication was a lot more difficult. So your wife would then go to somebody to help write the Navy message, send the Navy message to the boat. The boat then it gets transmitted to the person on board the ship, and then a decision is made how to get him or her home. And it's generally pretty fast. It's like within 24 hours if done correctly. And then we have these things called carrier on board delivery aircraft. They're now MV-22s, but they used to be a C2. But anyway, COD, yeah. And so that person has priority on that COD for a flight to, let's say, if you're in the Med, it's typically Sigonella or Crete. And then there's somebody meeting him to take him to a commercial airport. Now, the question is, who pays for the ticket? That's interesting. So sometimes it comes from Navy Relief. Sometimes it comes from most chiefs' messes have money for this, or but most squadrons have a slush fund, and that's where it comes from. And it's not even, it's basically the mess treasurer who has the money in the squadron, but there's ways to pay for the ticket. And so quite often he or she is on his way home within 24 or 36 hours. It depends on where you are. I mean, I've been deployed in places where there is no place to take them.
All right. Now,
it's really entertaining.
What we're trying to relay to you and talk about is the total preparation, the total involvement of all hands on deck, including the families, including the spouses. Everybody's got to be involved. Now, normally they have 6 to 9 months to take care of the ship, take care of the aircraft, train, do carrier quals. Now you're talking with a surge. You got 3 days, 4 days?
Yeah, typically you have less than a week. Again, it depends on where the ship is in its pre-deployment loadout and pre-deployment workups. So, but it's typically you have 3 to 5 days. You can get a carrier from zero, it's empty or pretty much empty, to full upload and out the door in 3 or 4 days. It's done. Okay. Normally it's not empty, but it's essentially topping things off. The biggest thing is parts, because you've gone down and you've drawn down the parts for airplanes and for maintenance of the ship and stuff like that. So you gotta go back and figure out what is my combat load for that. And so that's got to be filled in. Yeah, we have computers nowadays to figure it out, but I hate to tell you, they're computers and you have people entering them, and so the data is never accurate. So the air wing then, if the air wing's not CQ'd, okay, they have to go out and CQ. So they're out in this case.
That means carrier qual.
So they're out doing field carrier landing practice, and then they got to fly aboard the boat, and they can't land they got to go be CQ'd before they land on the boat, because you got to be able to be punched off the front end.
There's so much to it. And so our hats are off. When we come back, I'm going to throw out some more questions about what can we do to support those men and women who just got deployed and they're moving into harm's way. Think about this. They're running into the fire, not away from the fire. Amen. They're going into a situation that could escalate tremendously. And there are many factions that want that to happen. So our men and women who are supporting Israel, who are supporting peace in the Middle East, who are supporting taking care of Americans over there, they're on their way. And we'll be right back after these words from all of our partners. Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show. And thanks to our sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage and Lone Star Wealth Strategies. Now, let's continue this great conversation. I'm having a great day today with Captain Marc Liebman. You know what, Mark? We've known each other now, I guess, about what, 7, 8 years?
Yeah, it's longer than we want to admit to.
Yeah. Now, we talked about the sailors on board. Let's talk about the Marines that are on board.
Yeah. So most Americans don't understand that the Navy and the Marine Corps is our 911 force. The Marines are typically the first into the fight, and there's a lot of reasons for that. One of which is that with every carrier battle group, when you're doing your workups, you're working up with an amphibious rated group, which is a Marine landing force of some size, typically battalion size, and it has a small air wing on board the large Marine, or we call them amphibious ships, or they use a slang term, gators. So they have F-35s on board. They have not Harriers. They have MV-22s and helicopters, and about 1,000 Marines that they can put on the beach to do something. More often than not, the Navy Marine Corps team is the first. In fact, we've done 99 or 98% of these things, what they call national non-combatant evacuation operations, which is exactly part of what we're going to face in Gaza. And so I am surprised that an ARG has not been sent, but there is typically, if you have a carrier battle group, there's an ARG nearby. So the amphibious.
Suppose there's one over there already.
Yeah, I have. I looked in the U.S. Naval Institute's deployment tracker, and there's one in the Persian Gulf, and I saw one in the Western Atlantic. It's not getting all the publicity because it's not. It's most people go, oh, it's an aircraft carrier. Well, it's no, it is and it isn't. Okay.
Mhm.
But the amphibious ships have much larger hospitals. They have the space to carry lots and lots of refugees. They have the equipment that they can go ashore and set up a base. Now, because a carrier doesn't have that. Okay. So I would not be surprised if shortly there is one of the large landing ships, America class, Bataan, whatever they are, there. Off the beach. Again, 12 miles out, so it's international, over 12 miles out, so it's international waters. Nobody can complain. There will be some complaints. And plus the fact, 1,000 Marines is nothing to sneeze at. But again, typically what they would do is, and what doing most NEOs, is they go in, they set up a base, and then the Marines go in and act as security. But this is, again, a Navy Marine Corps team. We do it all the time. Every ARG has to do a NEO planning evolution and a small practice one as part of its workups. We on the carrier battle groups, it's part of the training syllabus, but it's kind of a nice to have, because the carrier really can't. Well, it can and it can't do a NEO. It can on a limited basis. We just don't have the assets.
So you're talking about not only do the sailors and airmen got to scramble something fierce and got to load everything on the carrier, but the Marines have got to be ready too.
Same thing.
Because we had Marines on our carriers. It is a huge operation to move a carrier.
Yeah, it's
now. Let me. I'm sorry, but let me change the subject because I want to get this in. Many of us, myself included, and my wife Diane, want to support those men and women. Is there an outlet? Can we go through the USO and send them gift boxes? Can we go through the USO and send them letters? Is there a way to do that? I should have thought about this before we came on the air. How do we support those men and women who are deploying and who are deployed over there right now in the middle of harm's way?
Yeah, USO is a great organization. I would also look at Navy and Marine Corps Relief. They're more broadly focused, but their emphasis is on the families at home.
Yeah.
And you and I, when we've been deployed, our focus is doing our job, and our families at home are in a compartment. Yeah, when we get a letter from home, we have a quick conversation or an email now. Yeah, we deal with that, and then we go back. That goes back into the family compartment, and we're back focused on whatever the heck we're doing. That's where I would start. There's a lot of charities. There's a lot of charities out there that don't that claim they're helping veterans, but I don't want to go down that. So
no, let's don't go in there.
That's the two. However, I want to plug what we do here in Dallas with the National Defense Briefing Series. This is a series of presentations that we hold where we bring to the American public in the Dallas-Fort Worth area experts in field of some aspect of foreign policy. So like on November 17th, we're going to have somebody have panel discussion about risk to the infrastructure. But it's put on by 5 veterans support organizations: Navy League, Jewish War Veterans, Association of the U.S. Army, Air Force and Airspace or Space Association, and Military Order of World Wars. And we raise money, and we raise a substantial amount of money, and then we donate it to these organizations, and they then have their own local charities here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. But I would look at some of the bigger veterans organizations, and I'll pick on Navy League because each Navy League chapter sponsors a ship or squadron. Marine Corps Association does pretty much the same thing. So that's where I'd start. But the USO, because the USO gets involved in getting people who are on emergency leave home.
I'll tell you what we're going to do next week. I'm planning to talk about Gold Star families and Blue Star families. We're going to be talking about those families who are back here in America while our men and women are overseas, or our men and women are involved. So next week, we're going to be talking about the military family, Blue Star and Gold Star families. I'm going to have some resources. So if you want to send a care package overseas, you want to send a letter to a soldier or a sailor or airman anywhere in the world, we're going to have some resources for you to do that. And I think that's terribly important. Mark, you've been there, done that. You made a career. What would you say very briefly to a young man or woman who's graduating from high school or college and are trying to figure out what they want to do?
Okay, so this is subject in which I have executed, or I've done what I believe. I have a grandson who is currently about to graduate from boot camp to become a SEAL. And I have another grandson who's an E6 in the Navy. My point is that it's a wonderful opportunity if you're not ready for college, because you will learn skills, leadership skills, people interface skills, and a job skill that you cannot get anyplace else. And you are a far more valued employee when you come out.
All right, we want to close with a prayer. Lord God of the universe, we thank you for our men and women who are running into the fire right now as we speak to support Israel and support the Middle East. Dear God, thank you, and put a hedge of protection around them and help to bring peace to Israel. Help them to watch over and take care and do the right thing. Thank you for our first responders. Thank you. Amen.